Eyeballs were cut so precisely that they had to get the knife underneath the eyelid.
They found something that absolutely horrifying.
This is the true story of Charles Albright, the eyeball killer. Charles Albright came into the world in 1933, but the life he was born into was not the one he would grow up in. Within 3 weeks of his birth, he was placed for adoption, handed off before he had even formed a single memory. The story his adoptive family told him about his biological mother was almost romantic in its tragedy. She was, they said, a brilliant young woman enrolled in law school, sharp, ambitious, and full of promise. She had quietly fallen in love with a fellow student, and the two had eloped in secret. But when a pregnancy followed, her powerful and wealthy father issued an ultimatum: annul the marriage, surrender the baby, or be cut off from the family entirely. She chose family over motherhood. Whether that story was entirely true, partially fabricated, or a complete invention to spare young Charles from a harder reality, he would never know. But it painted a picture of a woman who had no real choice, and of a child who entered the world already defined by loss and secrecy. The family that took him in was headed by a woman named Dell Albright, and from the very first day, Dell made Charles her entire world. Dell Albright was by all appearances a devoted and loving mother, but her love came with a suffocating level of control that left a lasting impact on young Charles. She was consumed by anxiety over his well-being. She changed his clothes up to 3 times a day, obsessed over cleanliness, and was terrified of germs, particularly polio. She monitored nearly everything he touched. Her punishments, while never crossing into outright abuse, were harsh and unsettling. She once locked him in a dark room simply for chewing on her tape measure. When he refused to nap, she physically tied him to his bed. Yet in other ways, she poured everything into making him exceptional. She personally taught him math, reading, and writing, pushing him so far ahead that he skipped 2 grade levels. She required 30 minutes of piano practice every single morning before school. She drilled manners into him so deeply that his politeness became one of his most noticeable traits as an adult. Warm, attentive, disarming, qualities that would later make him incredibly difficult to suspect. She chaperoned his dates. She called his girlfriend's parents in advance. She inserted herself into every corner of his personal life, blurring the line between protection and possession. From the outside, she was raising a prodigy, but underneath all that pressure, something was quietly building inside Charles. Something that had no outlet, no release, and nowhere to go. Among all the lessons Dell passed on to her son, one stands out with a chilling significance that would only become clear decades later. Dell developed an interest in taxidermy and decided to teach it to Charles through a mail order correspondence course. The two of them would go out together in search of small animals that had died naturally, birds, rodents, whatever they could find, and bring them home to practice on. Delle showed Charles how to make precise incisions along the skull. She demonstrated how to use a spoon to carefully remove the brain matter, and she taught him how to use forceps, thin surgical grade instruments, to reach into the orbital cavity and extract the eyes. It was a hobby, a perfectly legal, not uncommon hobby for that era. Many people practiced taxidermy, and Delle saw it as a way to bond with her son while teaching him patience and precision. But Charles absorbed something more than the mechanical steps of the craft. He absorbed a fascination, particularly with the eyes. The process of removing them with such care, of preserving them, of treating them as objects of interest rather than as windows into something living. This took root in a part of his mind that no one could see. He would not forget it, not when he was 20 or 30 or 40, not even when he was 57. The pressures of Charles's childhood began pushing outward while he was still in his early teens. By the time he was 13 years old, he had already accumulated an arrest record, caught for petty theft and charged with aggravated assault. These weren't isolated incidents born of one bad decision. They reflected a pattern. Charles was consistently drawn toward low-level criminal behavior, as if testing the boundaries that his mother had worked so hard to enforce. Rebellion often takes the shape of whatever a parent fears most, and for a boy raised under Dell's suffocating watch, small crimes may have offered the only sense of freedom available. What made his behavior particularly unsettling, even then, was something that his probation officer, a man who later went on to build a career in psychology, observed and articulated with striking precision. He noted that Charles had an extraordinary capacity to separate reality from his own internal narrative. He could say something entirely false, something he knew on some level was untrue, and in the moment of saying it, he genuinely believed himself. The line between performance and sincerity didn't exist for him the way it did for other people. This wasn't just charm. It was something more fundamental, a psychological architecture that allowed him to function without the moral friction that keeps most people honest. After leaving home, Charles didn't straighten out. He simply scaled up. During his first year of college, he was arrested for participating in a coordinated burglary operation that had targeted and broken into 3 separate commercial establishments. When Dell learned of the charges, she didn't step aside and allow the legal system to run its course. She petitioned the court to be permitted to serve as his legal counsel herself. When that was denied and a sentence was handed down, she pleaded with the judge to allow her to serve the sentence in his place. The judge declined both requests, and Charles Albright spent his 18th birthday behind bars. Prison didn't define him though. When he emerged, he redirected his considerable intelligence toward academics and genuinely thrived in the college environment. He was well-liked, sociable, and quick-witted, the kind of student who made a room more energetic simply by being in it. But there was one incident during those college years that, in retrospect, should have alarmed everyone who witnessed it. A close friend of his ended a relationship with a girl who was widely regarded as exceptionally attractive, particularly noted for her striking eyes. When the breakup happened, the ex-girlfriend's photographs were discarded. Charles retrieved them from the trash. He then carefully cut the eyes out of every photograph. He took those cut-out eyes and used them to replace the eyes in photos of his friend's new girlfriend. The altered images, faces with mismatched, transplanted eyes, were then distributed around the fraternity house. Everyone laughed. It was treated as an absurd, slightly twisted joke in the way that college pranks often are. Nobody looked at those eyeless photographs and thought, this person is showing us something real. Albright had once dreamed of becoming a doctor, but failed his medical school entrance exams. So instead, he married his college girlfriend and landed a teaching job in Arkansas. Except nearly everything on his application was a complete lie. He hadn't earned any of the qualifications he claimed. He had actually broken into official school district records and altered them himself. When the truth surfaced, the school quietly let him go, rather than cause a public scandal. He pleaded guilty to fraud and walked away with just 1 year of probation. After that, he and his wife moved on and started fresh. She taught school, he drifted, designing airplane parts, illustrating patents, doing carpentry, even working as a hairstylist. At the salon, he convinced a friend to pay him $250 for a portrait of his wife, claiming to be a skilled artist. Weeks passed with nothing to show. When the friend finally showed up unannounced, the painting was there and it was stunning, incredibly detailed, almost lifelike. But where the eyes should have been, there was nothing. Just two empty white voids staring back. Whatever darkness had been building inside Charles Albright for the better part of 5 decades finally broke the surface in the final month of 1990. Mary Pratt was a woman well known in the neighborhoods of South Dallas. She was found outdoors, stripped of most of her clothing, wearing only a t-shirt and a bra. Her face and chest bore the severe bruising of a prolonged beating. She had been shot in the head at close range. To the detectives who arrived on the scene, the circumstances were not immediately unusual. Women in her line of work faced violence with heartbreaking regularity, and the prevailing assumption was that this was a transaction that had turned lethal, a client who had become dangerous. Mary had been well regarded in her community. People knew her, cared about her, but with no witnesses, no weapon recovered, and no physical evidence pointing in any clear direction, the investigation quickly ran cold. The case broke open in an entirely different way during the autopsy. Charles had closed Mary's eyes before leaving her. When the medical examiner gently lifted her eyelids, what she found stopped her cold. The eyes were gone, both of them, and they had not been taken crudely or hastily. Whoever had removed them had done so with a level of precision and delicacy that suggested genuine surgical knowledge. The surrounding tissue was completely undamaged. Not a single careless cut, not a single trace of the kind of tearing or bruising you would expect from an amateur. This detail changed everything about the investigation. The case was escalated immediately to the FBI, where it was entered into a national database. The profile was narrow and deeply strange, an unknown subject with a compulsion to surgically harvest human eyes from his victims. Two months into 1991, Charles struck again. Susan Peterson was discovered on the same stretch of road where Mary Pratt had been left. Like Mary, she had been beaten severely before being shot, this time in the head, the chest, and the stomach. Like Mary, she was found with almost no clothing on her body. And like Mary, when the medical examiner conducted the autopsy, both eyes were missing. The removal was once again flawless, precise, carried out by someone who clearly knew what they were doing, someone who understood anatomy well enough to extract 2 eyeballs without leaving so much as a scratch on the surrounding tissue. The police found themselves in a difficult position. On one hand, there was a compelling argument for going public, warning the community, opening tip lines, generating leads. On the other hand, disclosing the full nature of the crimes would almost certainly alert the killer, giving him reason to alter his behavior, relocate his activities, or simply disappear. Meanwhile, law enforcement set up surveillance operations across the area's known solicitation zones. Undercover officers worked the streets. Every vehicle connected to potential clients was logged and cross-referenced against criminal databases with unusual or aberrant records. Nothing emerged. Charles remained completely invisible to them. On March 19, 1991, children walking near a local elementary school in a residential part of Dallas made a horrifying discovery. Shirley Williams, who worked in a completely different part of the city than Mary Pratt and Susan Peterson, was found crumpled against the street curb, unclothed, her face badly battered, her nose broken. She had been shot twice, once through the top of the skull and once through the back of the head. Charles had anticipated the police investigation closing in and had deliberately shifted his hunting ground to avoid detection. Exactly the scenario investigators had feared when they debated whether to go public. But this time, he had been rushed. In his haste to get away from the scene, he left something behind: the broken tip of an X-Acto blade. It was small, easily overlooked, but it was the first tangible physical evidence left at any of the three crime scenes, and it confirmed what investigators already suspected: that the killer was using precision craft blades, the kind used by artists, model makers, and surgeons to perform his removals. When word of a third killing spread through the streets, the reaction was immediate and visceral. Women who had been working the area's streets packed up and left, some for other neighborhoods, some for other cities entirely. The fear was real and it was warranted. Among those who remained was Brenda White, a woman who had been working the streets of Dallas for years and had made it her policy never to yield to panic. One evening, a white station wagon rolled to a stop beside her. The driver was polite, well-mannered, and appeared completely non-threatening. She got in. She directed him toward a nearby motel, her standard arrangement for new clients. But the man behind the wheel declined. He had somewhere else in mind, somewhere more private. Every instinct Brenda had developed over years of navigating dangerous situations fired at once. She had a firm, non-negotiable rule: no new client ever took her anywhere except the motel. Not a house, not a back road, nowhere private. She told him to stop the car and let her out. He refused, and then the politeness evaporated entirely. He became hostile, furious, a transformation that happened so quickly it confirmed everything she feared. Brenda acted fast. She produced a can of mace and sprayed it directly into his face. Before he could recover, she was out of the vehicle and running. Behind her, she could hear him screaming, not just in pain, but in rage. He was threatening to kill every woman who worked those streets. As detectives dug back through old tips and forgotten leads, one particular call jumped out. Shortly after Mary Pratt's murder, an anonymous woman had phoned the tip line. She said Mary had introduced her to a new boyfriend, a man she described as unusually polite, charming, and completely trustworthy on the surface. But something Mary had told her stuck in her mind. This man had a strange fixation on ice, and at some point, Mary had discovered a collection of X-Acto blades hidden in his attic. The tip had been logged and then buried, lost under the avalanche of incoming information. Nobody had connected it to anything at the time, until Deputy Walter Cook pulled it back up while reviewing all three murder cases together. The name attached to that tip was Charles Albright. A photo lineup was quietly assembled and shown to the two women who had survived encounters with the attacker. One identified him instantly, no hesitation. The other one's reaction said everything without words. The moment she reached Albright's photo, she froze. She couldn't speak. She walked out of the room, and it took her several days to finally gather enough courage to formally point her finger at him. That was all the confirmation investigators needed. In the early hours of March 22, 1991, a SWAT team assembled outside a quiet residential address in Dallas. At precisely 2:30 in the morning, they went in. The door came off its hinges. Officers flooded through every entrance simultaneously. The house that Charles Albright had shared with his wife was suddenly full of shouting, movement, and the blinding glare of tactical lights. His wife was woken violently from sleep, stumbling out of the bedroom in her robe, completely disoriented and terrified by what was happening in her own home. Charles Albright offered no resistance. He was silent as the handcuffs were applied, silent as he was walked out the front door, silent as he was placed in a vehicle and driven away. Whatever was happening behind those eyes of his, he kept it entirely to himself. The case that the prosecution brought against Charles Albright was built largely on circumstantial evidence. He was careful, methodical in a way that reflected either extraordinary composure or decades of habitual deception. He had left almost nothing behind at any of the three scenes. The broken X-Acto blade tip from the Shirley Williams scene was the most concrete physical piece of evidence. Witness identifications played a significant role. The pattern of behavior, the connections, the anonymous tip about the eye fixation and the blades in the attic, all of it painted a compelling picture. But compelling is not always conclusive in a court of law. When the jury returned its verdict, Charles Albright was found guilty of the murder of Shirley Williams, and only that murder. The evidence supporting convictions in the deaths of Mary Pratt and Susan Peterson was deemed insufficient for a guilty verdict. One conviction, one victim, officially. But the jury's recommendation on sentencing left no ambiguity about what they believed. They recommended life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, and the court agreed. Charles Albright is still alive, sitting in a Texas prison with no chance of parole, an old man who has never once admitted to what he did. Ask him about the eyes and he doesn't flinch. He calmly insists the police remove them during the autopsies themselves, just to make the case more sensational. Same composed voice, same polite tone, the exact same manner he used his entire life to look people in the eye and lie. The eyeballs were never recovered. His true motive was never explained. And the full story of what drove him to do what he did remains buried somewhere inside a man who has made a lifetime habit of hiding the truth. Some questions, it seems, will never have answers.